Thank you for joining. We're going to start in a couple of seconds. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today at Aparo's Nonprofit Bites and Insights. This month, we are focused on winning with your website with a special focus on WordPress. So if you were able to join us last week, a quick recap, and for those of you who weren't able to join us, we got some information, high-level information around WordPress, as well as some information that we need to know and do in order to have our websites working for us. That recording is uploaded onto our website right now, so you can feel free to take a look at that recording. I do want to mention and apologize for the abrupt ending. My internet decided it wanted to take a break. So right at Q&A, it did stop. If you did join us last week and have questions around that webinar, please feel free to drop in the Q&A right now, and we'll be sure to address them. Today, we're going to jump into some security. Now, I know as nonprofit staff and leaders, that is not a very enticing topic, but we know that is very important. So I know we're going to walk away with some great security tips. And then next week, we're going to dive into some marketing and design. A few housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded as well. All of you who are attending will receive a follow-up email from me by the end of the day on Monday that will have a link to the recording as well as a PDF of the slide deck. At the bottom, this is what your toolbar should look like. You have access to chat, to raise your hand, and Q&A, as well as closed captioning if you'd like to use that. So really quickly about Aparo before I turn it over to our speakers. Aparo is a nonprofit like all of you. What we do is we connect nonprofits to technology and business processes, expertise, and resources in their communities to help amplify their impact. The image on the right is our model. As you can see, what we do is we connect nonprofits with skilled volunteers and corporations. Really quickly, these are buckets of services. We have advice, education, solutions. Advice is essentially our consulting service. You connect you one-on-one with a tech therapist to talk about your technology need and challenges, however big or small. We also offer customized team trainings as well as these free webinars. If you're looking for a more robust solution, we will work with you to connect you with a volunteer team to get you that tailored solution that you're looking for. And then finally, I do want to mention that Aparo's Mission Possible Award application is still open. It is closing tomorrow. This is where one lucky nonprofit will receive $10,000 in cash and consulting services to make their technology dream come true. So if you're interested in that, I will drop the link in the chat in a moment. Again, that application will be closing tomorrow. And then finally, these are the different ways to connect with us. You can visit us on our website, subscribe to our email list, or you can contact me directly. And with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to Ben and Ross.
All right, awesome. Ben Yenting, can you see my shared screen okay?
We see you, Ross.
Excellent, excellent. Well, welcome back for those who are coming back from last week. Welcome to those who weren't able to make it last week. We hope to see you next week. We're glad you're here today. As Yenting mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit more about WordPress security. Last week, we sort of covered, do you have a WordPress website? The differences between WordPress.org and WordPress.com. But today we're going to dive more into these top 5 security tips, we're going to talk about managing your users, what a content delivery network is and why that's important, what a web application firewall is and why that's important. We're going to talk a little bit more about how WordPress works when it comes to plugins, themes, and updating the core code. We're going to speak about uptime monitoring, and we decided, hey, we were going to do top 5. Let's add some bonus tips in there. A little bit about licensing of those themes and plugins, as well as something called PHP versions. We'll dive more into what that is and why it's important. Our speakers today, I'm here in the middle of the list, Ross Feldman. I work with a company called CCP Tech. We're an outsourced IT provider, but we're all here in North and South Carolina, all 10 of our engineers. We have for-profit clients, but I own our nonprofit portfolio. About 12% of our clients are nonprofit. We're happily growing that. We're picking up some more nonprofits this month and next month. Which I'm very excited to onboard. And Ben Wilson's going to introduce himself here in just a moment. He's with Delivery Path, and you've already met Yenting. Go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, Ross. Hi, I'm Ben, and you may have been on last week's presentation. You heard me speak. I own Delivery Path, and Delivery Path is a WordPress website hosting company. And we work with a lot of nonprofits, specifically many of them with Aparo. Thanks for the intro, Ross.
My pleasure. All right. Thanks, y'all. All right. Yenting talked a little bit about housekeeping. I want to add a little more about how Ben and I function. You are capable of coming off of mute. You can ask questions. We actually like to be interrupted. It's not actually called interrupting. We call it participating. So if you have a question, feel free to ask. You can also ask inside the Q&A box at the bottom or the chat box, and we will answer those questions either during this presentation, and on that previous slide was our email addresses. When Yenting sends that recording out, she also includes Ben and my email addresses. We love getting questions asked directly to us if you needed more time or needed to talk to your staff more about your website. All right, so let's kind of dive into that first item. Inside of WordPress, you have the capability to give other folks rights to edit your website, other users. It's important for you to once in a while look and see who's in your user list. There's a lot of turnover that happens with nonprofits and regular businesses, and maybe you should check and be like, oh, Johnny left the organization 2 years ago. Why is he still an administrator? And then remove his rights from the website. Johnny may or may not need to be an administrator. Maybe he just needed to be able to edit or update content. We like to preach the practice of least privileged users. So if somebody was supposed to be an administrator because they need full rights, that's correct. But if they don't need full rights to the website, make sure they have a lesser privilege. So just check who's on your user list, as well as what level of access they have. All right, Ben, you want to talk about Cloudflare CDNs? Go ahead,
Ross,
Ben.
can you go back to a slide? I want to go ahead and mention a thing about writing content with our content writers and those how those roles might play out. And I think we got maybe an extra minute. I'll just grab a minute from there, from that slide I'm about to speak about.
Awesome.
Within WordPress, folks, the administrator role is very powerful. You can do everything within WordPress with that administrator role. But there's sometimes you're going to hire a contract writer or a friend, someone's going to come online, and maybe they don't need to have all the power to manipulate all the content within your WordPress site. So what you do is you give them a lower role within the site. So maybe now they can only go to posts, and they have the ability to create new posts, but they can't publish them. And so that's really helpful because you as the administrator, or maybe you have another team member who takes responsibility for moderating those posts and then deciding when they're going to be published. And they have a role as well. So use the users' roles to work towards, work with you or towards what you're trying to go with. It's a great way to control the workflow and to maintain the level of quality before content gets published. Yeah, just wanted to insert that little goodie in there. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, let's go ahead and go with this one. All right, so content delivery networks. Content delivery networks, or CDNs, can be kind of confusing. So I'm going to give you an example of one that many of us use almost every evening when we're hanging out with our families. watching Disney or HBO or maybe Netflix. So when you go to Netflix on your TV and you choose to watch, the latest, whatever is fun and current, right? That video seems to play pretty seamlessly. It doesn't hop or skip. And well, that's interesting because millions, literally, of other homes may actually be watching that new release from Netflix at the same time. It's hard to believe that why would all of those streaming videos to all the homes across America and Canada and all our friends in Mexico, they're all watching this content simultaneously. All of it's coming from one server in one place? Not a chance. So what happens is Netflix is they have data centers all around the country, all around the world, in fact. And when you go and watch that video, the video you're watching is actually streaming from the local data center in your region. And so I happen to know here in Charlotte, there's a Netflix or two data center where when I watch Netflix, that video is streaming from that one place. So it's decentralized, it's much more stable. If there's a power outage in a region, that's okay. Folks in another region are still going to be able to watch their content for their subscription service. Well, that's a content delivery network. And so video streamers use that to their advantage, and it really gives a great quality experience to the customer. Well, how do you use content delivery networks with WordPress? And I have on a slide here, here's the logo. The gold standard in this space is Cloudflare. And you can actually use, a little tip here, you can use Cloudflare for free. Yes, it's a light version and you don't get all the goodies, all the yummies, but for your WordPress website, the freebie stuff that Cloudflare gives you is actually pretty good. And you just need to go in there and work with your hosting vendor. They're going to give you some coaching tips, and there's a lot of documentation online. It'll kind of coach you through some of those settings. But I'll give you the example of some of the upsides here. So for example, when you go visit the Aparo website and you're looking at the photos and the logos and the graphics and the CSS, all the other stuff that makes that visual experience appealing, that all isn't coming off of that one web server, which happens to be in the Midwest somewhere. They're coming out of all those images, and all that code is coming out of a CDN from Cloudflare that happens to be right here in the Charlotte area. Two benefits: the website loads fast. It loads fast on your mobile phone. It loads fast on your desktop computer. And the other piece too is the caching tier. So it's fast because it's cached in that place, and it's also a security thing. So if something bad happens, that caching tier is slow, can be slow to update sometimes. So if there's a blip on the server, the caching tier kind of allows you to ignore that, and your end user doesn't have a bad experience. They don't notice anything strange. And so that's really good. Now, your web developer will refresh the cache every once in a while when you're publishing a new post. Or if Yenting called me up and said, "Hey, Ben, we've changed the Aparo logo. We need to get the new logo out." I would refresh the cache at Cloudflare. And now everyone on their cell phone would see that new logo. And so it's also the second part that my brain kind of stopped working there for a second. The second part of it is resource allocation. So that server, the primary server that hosts the website, isn't quite as busy. So it's a great way to lower costs. If you're working with a discount vendor that's maybe charging you for the amount of usage, like I know there are some hosting vendors out there, if you get more than 2,000 visitors a month, they charge you more. Use Cloudflare, and it will keep your hits on your web server down, yet you could still service a larger array of visitors visiting your website, and you're going to save that money, which is really great. So there's that way to drop that cost for you. By the way, if you don't want to use Cloudflare, while they are the gold standard, there is another vendor out there which is really great, and folks have gotten good value out of them. It's StackPath. You can go to stackpath.com. By the way, I don't have any economic affiliation or financial benefit from promoting either of these vendors. I happen to use both of them, but I'm not getting any kickbacks for recommending these two vendors. It's cloudflare.com and StackPath, PATH.com. Let's see, Ross, I think Yeah. All right, so now we're going to talk about web application firewalls, and it's a nice segue because Cloudflare is your web application firewall vendor. StackPath as well provides WAF services. What is a web application firewall? And maybe you can see from my silly face the excitement I have talking about web application. I'm sorry, my headset stopped working. They're extremely powerful tools that allow you to ensure the security and quality of the website experience with your customer. And it's kind of in the opposite direction, and I'll explain. Suppose you have a bad actor that is submitting over and over again submissions on the contact form on your website, and it's spam, and it's consuming resources and it's wasting your time. You would use a web application firewall like Cloudflare to block that user from visiting your website. Another example would be, suppose you're a nonprofit that only supplies services or provides services in North Carolina. Visitors from near Google Analytics, you see you have a lot of visitors, strangely, coming out of Iran, Russia, Thailand. And that's fine. Some of them may actually be interested humans, or maybe some of your contractors, your overseas contractors that are visiting the site. Okay, that's fine. But you may notice in your Google Analytics that they're consuming a lot of resources. There's a lot of volume coming in. Those actually aren't humans. Those are bots and malware scanners and software and just really the dark part of the web, touching your website, looking for opportunities to do bad things to your website, damage your brand, damage your image, slow down the services that you provide to your customers. You would implement a web application firewall to maybe block that country. Or you would implement a web application firewall to block a certain type of visitor. In Google Analytics, you can see, well, there are desktop visitors on their desktop computer. There's mobile phone visitors, but you can also tell from Google Analytics which version of browser that the visitor is coming in from, which version of cell phone that they're coming in from. There are versions of applications that are going to visit your website that are neither a desktop computer or a cell phone. These are custom written bots. Well, you would log into Cloudflare or StackPath, and you could implement a block to restrict access from that custom written bot from visiting your site. Now, this is a double-edged sword, and it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game, because you may be leveraging Facebook to your benefit. You may have a listing on Facebook for your nonprofit. You want Facebook to be able to index your site and pass content back and forth. Many of you will use your Google Analytics code for tracking purposes, and many of you will use your Facebook Pixels code for tracking purposes. Well, the web application firewall might block some of the Facebook tracking or block some of the Google Analytics tracking. So a little bit of a cat and mouse game, but there's ways around it. Your hosting vendor will be able to help you out with that. And there's also a lot of documentation online. You would go to Facebook, you would go to Cloudflare, and they would give you certain IPs to create exceptions for or special rules so that you don't block the good guys. Ross, did you want to add to that idea?
Yeah, why we threw the image on the slide. I like to put the picture of your website or your data or your network being a castle. And the web application firewall is that moat, that drawbridge, and that big gate that comes down, right? So you want to let the people in that you want to let in. You want to keep the people out that you don't want to have on your website. So that's kind of a great visual representation when we talk about what a web application firewall is.
And let me wrap that up with an example that many of you have probably already had, and you didn't realize what was going on. Have you ever gone to a website, you typed in the web address, and there was a white screen, and maybe it counted 3, 2, 1, and then the screen loaded? Or maybe you went to the website and it said, hey, of the 9 squares, click the 3 that are traffic light or the motorcycle, right? Kind of annoying sometimes. It slows down your web experience. those are the result of, in many cases, web application firewalls. They're checking to see if you're a human. So the really good quality one is the one where you go to the website and you have to wait that 3 seconds. It's just wait, 3, 2, 1, and then whoosh, there's a paro. You don't really have to do anything. You don't have to do the motorcycle or the headlight checks or anything like that. You just wait a few seconds. What's happening is the vendor in this Cloudflare or StackPath is checking your computer and is doing a little back and forth silently, privately, and it's checking to see if you're real or not. And if you are, now you're on the website and you have that experience and you can click around and you don't get slowed down. Your experience doesn't get slowed down over and over again. And when you are working with and configuring a web application firewall, by the way, and I realize I'm really going down the rabbit hole, but I want to tell you there's a lot of options out there. You can do more than just block a country. For example, those strange visitors that are coming from Thailand. Instead of saying, don't allow anybody coming in from Thailand, there is an option where you can say, it's an optional thing. For anybody that's coming in from Thailand, put that white screen up, put that prompt up. So if they're a human being, they can come in. But if they're a bot, they get blocked, as opposed to just the flat out block everybody. And the reason why you would want to go with that option is many of our nonprofits will hire overseas developers or designers. That's great, save a few dollars. Take advantage of that wage arbitrage, I get it. You don't want to block your designer or your developer from being able to access the site. And the only inconvenience that he or she is going to have is waiting that 3 seconds or clicking the images that have a motorcycle in the picture. So you can do that. All right, thanks for the slide for the WAF rule, Ross.
Yeah.
I hope yeah. And by the way, if you have questions, I'll keep my Q&A screen up here. If you have questions about WAF or about CDNs and how they integrate with each other, feel free to post them in the Q&A. And by the way, I did talk a lot last week and we had a little networking snafu at the end. If you have any leftover questions from your notes from last week's presentation as well, just like Yenting said, feel free to post them in the questions there and we'll get you handled. So I'm going to hit mute and let you take that next slide, Ross.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I did notice a couple people did have to join late. It's the world we live in today, but it's great that this is recorded and Yenting's going to send it by end of business on Monday, including both of our email addresses. And we love questions. We want you to ask questions. We don't want you to, live in a world where you're just not sure. We know that it's an ever-changing world. So speaking on ever-changing worlds, WordPress has been around for a couple decades. With every piece of software or code, there has to be updates. Updates have a few different reasons. One of the primary reasons is new features. As WordPress has grown from being a blogging platform to being a full web content platform, they've had to release updates. Before an update existed, some folks wanted to add additional functionality. The way you add additional functionality to a WordPress site is with something called plugins. You can also use the term add-ins, but the term in WordPress land is plugins. So you have a website and you want to put a contact form. Well, WordPress itself doesn't have a built-in contact form, but with plugins like Jetpack and Contact Form 7 and Gravity Forms and hundreds of others, they've added a functionality. So that's what a plugin is. Now, WordPress used to have a very plain design, and they added the ability to do themes. So themes are where you see this presentation. We have the Aparo logo, we have the green, we have the lines to give that stylized look to a website. That's called a theme. In a WordPress website, you install or add themes similar to the way you add plugins. Core is that core code, that WordPress.org download, has all the capabilities, core code. So that's your 3 pillars: core, themes, and plugins. Well, with core, themes, and plugins, all of them require updates. I put a screenshot here in the bottom left-hand corner of the presentation that shows you when you're logged into your dashboard that there's a little indicator that says you have 3 updates. It's important to, when you see those updates, to run updates on your website. We spoke a little bit last week about backups. before you run an update, make sure you have a good solid backup of your website, because updates can go awry. They can be partially deployed or incompatible, and you want to have the ability to roll back. These updates are important, not just because of functionality, but because of security. As code is written by humans, humans make mistakes. They may write the code quickly or not realize they create a security hole with an update or with their original 1.0 version code. So as security vulnerabilities are discovered, along with the updates that come in for new features, there's also security updates included. Another thing that comes in updates is, Ben was talking about CDNs, those content delivery networks. You want a website that loads quickly. It helps because your end user is in a rush and multitasking and only has maybe a 2-second to 10-second attention span. If your website takes 15 to 30 seconds to load, they've moved on to the next thing. I know that nonprofits and businesses are different types of industries, but they have that similarity. For-profit, it's about that customer and getting new business, but for the nonprofit, it's about getting your mission out there and getting more donations. So if your site doesn't load, you can't get donations. So that CDN provides some speed, but in those updates, there's some efficiencies that may have been found in the code. The code created a slower website, and this update makes the plugin or the theme or the core a little faster. One of the things I like to do when I'm doing a site audit is I'm looking at your plugins. You may have 14, 20, 75 plugins. It might be that you don't need all of those installed because you don't use them anymore. So it's really good to clean up those old plugins. They'll make your site a little faster. They'll also help in case there was a vulnerability that was opened by one of those plugins. If it's not installed anymore, then your site won't be as vulnerable. So you want to remove those no longer installed plugins. As I mentioned, WordPress is a couple decades old, and they've created these themes that you can sideload, and there's themes that come already installed. The 2021 theme, 2022, 2023, every year they put out new themes. You don't want those installed if you're not using it. So again, plugins, themes, if you're not using that theme or plugin, remove it from your website. All right, so I mentioned a term called sideloading, and I'm actually going to get into a little more detail on the next slide. With themes and plugins, you have two avenues to be able to get plugins and themes. There's a repository of plugins and themes on the WordPress.org website. So when you add the theme or plugin, it comes from that repository, and you know it's a trusted source. But you also have the ability to download from third-party websites that plugin or theme and then add it to your website. So I put a little indication here on this slide. If you're looking at your plugins, you'll notice if it's sideloaded, as that My Plugin example, it says visit plugin website, and it does not have the capability to do automatic updates. The WP Migrate example says view details because it's listed in the repository. It'll take you to the repository, and it has that ability to do auto updates. Why is that important? If there is an update, your website will be able to automatically receive that update. If it's a side-loaded plugin that you downloaded from another website, it won't be automatically updated. So if there's a version 2 or version 3 with those security patches and you have a side-loaded plugin or theme, you're going to have to know to go back in to update that plugin or theme. All right. Looks like we don't have any questions or additional messages in the chat.
Hey, Ross, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Ben.
Maybe someone's afraid to ask it, so I'll go ahead and put it out there for you.
Go for it.
If I have a plugin that I'm not using and I deactivate it, should I also delete it?
The best practice is to deactivate it, make sure your site is happy, and back it up before you delete it.
What is the difference between the delete and the deactivate? We kind of assume that we know the difference.
Yeah, exactly. The code base is still existing on your website when it's deactivated. But when it's deleted, the code is removed from the website.
Okay, so if it's enabled, my site's using it. If it's deactivated, the code is still on the site, but I'm not using it. If I delete it, it's not on the site, and obviously I'm not using it.
You got it.
Okay. And that goes for themes and plugins.
Awesome. Yes, for both.
Oh, can I insert something?
Go for it.
About the auto update feature. So on the slideshow, everyone, you see on the right-hand side, enable auto updates. That's a really wonderful feature. And it's a pretty reasonable thing to do in your plugins and in your themes to click that enable auto updates. But it can also be a little bit dangerous because sometimes a plugin or a theme may update, and when that occurs, while the code may be okay, it may interrupt or disrupt how the website functions normally. And I'll give you a great example. There's a plugin called Events Calendar, really powerful plugin. A lot of folks use it for displaying the calendar of events and having customers sign up for it. Well, they had a pretty big, really high quality release recently that changed the functionality, brought some cool new features. Folks that had that auto update feature enabled, though, found their websites were broken the next day. So what I recommend is maybe keep the auto update feature disabled initially. Talk to your web hosting vendor, go to your local WordPress meetup group. There happens to be one here in Charlotte. And you can share notes with your friends and colleagues that run WordPress, or talk to your hosting vendor. And you can find out which ones are the good quality, well-maintained plugins that maybe I can leave auto update enabled, and which themes should maybe I leave disabled and manually update so that you don't see any strangeness on your website. Did I describe that all right, Ross?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is that community really helps. The folks who have walked that path before can really answer those questions. Ben and I have been part of the Charlotte WordPress group for several years, and we always have new folks walk in and they're just looking for that, hey, is this a good theme? Is this a good plugin? And it's great to have that community to get around the new folks as well as the established folks to be able to get those questions answered. I love that there's a Q&A that came in. Thank you. The question is, can you tell if a plugin is unused? Yes. So on this screenshot, we have my plugin that has a button that says activate. The other plugin says deactivate. So if it's active, it'll be blue and I'll give you the option to deactivate. If it's none used and deactivated, it'll be like this first one. And hopefully that cleared it up. But you will see white and active as your choice, to white and the word activate as your choice, or blue and the option to deactivate. So that's how you know if a plugin is used or unused on your website.
And by the way, I think that's a great question, because the rule of thumb in WordPress world is the less, and because it comes up, hey, Ben, I need to make my website faster. Okay. The first thing I do, and the first thing Ross does, is we go to the plugins page and we look to see how many plugins do you have. The rule of thumb, and it's pretty universal. It's not an absolute, but it's pretty well, serves us pretty well. It's a guidance. The less plugins you have, the faster your website will run. And so if you go to your website, you click on plugins and you see 85 plugins in that list, I'm going to go ahead and bet there's probably an opportunity to downsize a little bit. And by doing so, you'll see a little bit of a speed boost on your site. So less is more in the world of plugins. And I would say, I don't know if it's going to give you a speed boost, but it's definitely less complexity. Less themes is more as well. You can only really use one theme at a time. If you have 10 themes installed, and there are some themes in there that you just don't ever use, like the default themes that Ross was talking about that WordPress gives you, you can delete those as well.
One of the things we talked a little bit about was backups and updates and what it does to your website. While you're editing your website, you should be able to keep an eye on it and see if it goes down while you're editing it. But what happens when you're not looking at your website? We love sharing free tools with nonprofits. There's a website called Uptime Robot that we have linked here in the slides. What it is a free tool that keeps an eye on your website to see if it's up or down. In the for-profit business world, if a customer is trying to get to your website to buy your product and it's down, you just lost that business. In the nonprofit world, someone's coming to your website to share your mission with others or to do a donation and your website's down, you're not going to be able to get the donations that you need to survive. So uptime monitoring is really important for you to be aware if your website is down first versus your customer or your donor being the one that reaches out and says, hey, your website's down. So this is a free tool that helps you with that. Okay, so those are your top 5. And this is one of your bonus items. All right, so we talked about plugins, themes, WordPress core, and there's one more layer under that, the engine. So just like your car has an engine, there's the engines of the 1960s and there's the engines of 2023. They're still internal combustion engines or hybrid or battery electric, but they're new generations of engines that are more efficient and hopefully won't break down as early in life as they used to. Inside your WordPress website, it runs off of a code base called PHP. And what I put up here is a pie chart just to kind of give you a visual reference that 8.2.1 is the latest version of PHP, except in this snapshot of the internet from last July, which was the latest I could get at the time when we make these slides, was that not everybody had updated their PHP. This is very much out of the WordPress realm and down to your host, your web host. Some hosts are better about it than others. Some will auto update, some won't. Some will communicate with you, hey, your WordPress PHP code is out of date, but it's important for that security, functionality, and speed that you run a newer version of PHP. So work with your web host to see what version you have installed on the server right now and what the latest one is, and to get you updated. One host that's an affordable host will have thousands of websites on one server. With the thousands of websites, they're running off of that one server, which means sometimes one version of PHP. So if they update it for one site, it might break it for the other sites. With some good quality hosts, you get your own sectioned out server so that you can run whatever version of PHP your website requires. So that was a little bonus item. And the next bonus item is something that Ben was very excited to talk about, and I'm excited to hear about it as well. Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, it only because it just happened recently for a customer, and I realized, oh my gosh, Ross, why didn't I insert this topic into the slides? And we were creating the slideshow a while ago. We really need to cover this topic. So licensing, and it has a relationship to the PHP version that we had on the previous slide that Ross just talked about. Sometimes, and I'm going to continue that PHP version a little bit, because what will happen is if you don't update your plugins, if you don't update your themes, you could call up your hosting vendor and say, hey, Ross told me to get the latest version of PHP. Can you upgrade it for me? And they do that, and then magically you find your site broke. Well, there's a relationship. Some versions of your theme and some versions of your plugin won't work with an older or a newer version of PHP. Ooh. So what do? The rule of thumb is stay current. And one of the ways to stay current, and you can take me to that next slide, Ross, is get your licensing done properly. So you want to have your hosting vendor work with you or do it on your own. Make sure you always bring your plugins up to date. So maybe you did it automatically, or maybe you did it manually. You can see in this picture here, the plugin WooCommerce is up to date. It's in blue, and there's no notice in yellow that it needs to be updated. So that one's in a good state. But the WooCommerce Advanced Notifications plugin, if I click that Update Now link that you see in the yellow bar, it'll error out and it'll show me in pink, failed, you need to go to the subscriptions. Well, what does that mean? Well, what it means is not all software inside WordPress is free. Not all of it is open source. I got to pay for some of it. Well, actually you do. Sorry, guys. Some vendors, and this is kind of we live in a capitalist society, some vendors, in this case, WooCommerce and their partners, they release WooCommerce for free so that you can sell products, take donations or whatnot. But maybe there's some scaled down functionality so that one of their partners can sell additional features that you need to have. For example, I'd love to have a tax calculator, or I'd love to have some coupon code functionality. Well, that's an add-on. And you would need to go to that vendor to acquire that plugin, and you need to pay to keep it working properly. This is kind of a double-edged sword. It may still work properly if you don't update it, but you won't have the most recent code, which is a twofold problem. It's a security issue. You don't have the newest code. In case a hack or malware or something bad is happening, you won't have protection against that. But the other piece too is if you call up your hosting vendor and say, I'd really love to have the latest version of PHP, they can't upgrade it because your code's not up to date. It won't work with the new version of PHP. Oh my goodness. So the rule of thumb to keep it simple is you really want to work hard to keep your plugins and your themes up to date. If you decide to use a plugin that requires a licensing fee, pay it. Now there's options. You always have options in this space. There are, a good example are sliders. A lot of folks like this sliding animation of photos and a portfolio on the screen. There are vendors out there that make these really wonderful slider plugins. I can put in my portfolio of images. They slide in and out. It may even be free for the first year with that theme, but you got tricked. A year later, you get a notification when you log into your site. You try to update that plugin and you find out the rug pull. It's going to cost you $199 a year to stay current with that software, and which gives you those safety protections and to have access to support. That's expensive. And we're running a nonprofit here, and we got to watch every penny that goes out the door. And it's possible there may be more than one plugin like that. In this case, I couldn't even fit the whole slide in for this customer. This is a screenshot from one of our hosting customers. They had several plugins that all work with WooCommerce, and they weren't paying the licensing fee. And we weren't able to upgrade their PHP to 8, which means their site was running a little bit slower than their competitors. There are almost always opportunities for this. So with the slider that I talked about a second ago, there are free sliders out there that you don't have to pay licensing fees for. Maybe it's not as slick or as elegant how you use it, but it's free. And you get those updates current. Or you can work with your designer, which I really recommend when you're going through that build process of your website. You're going to work with your designer and your developer, and you're going to be very clear. Hey, designer and developer, I really would like my new WordPress website from a nonprofit to not require the use of any plugins or themes that require expensive licensing fees. That's the statement. And so your designer has heard this before. And so it won't be a surprise. It won't be a difficult conversation. They're going to come back to you and say, okay, that's going to force us to rethink some of the functionality on the site. We have options. And maybe you don't need that slideshow on that one screen. Maybe there is another way that we can solve that design requirement or that design idea that you have. You'll figure it out. Some plugins are only $50 a year. Maybe you want to pay that fee. Maybe you're okay with it. Chat with your designer, chat with your developer at the get-go. Some of the hosting vendors that you talk to, you can call them up and say, can you help us with this? They may be able to say, sure, that expensive theme that you've been using or that expensive plugin you've been using, we've been recommending this other one over here. And Ross is smiling right now because he knows I'm about to say Gravity Forms and Contact Form 7. Was that on your mind, Ross? Were you going to say that?
Always, always.
So,
contact forms are the first thing on my mind.
That's right. So folks are saying, Ben, which is a good form? We want to get that feedback in that contact fill out section on the site. Well, you could pay for the licensing for Gravity Forms. It's good software and it's really easy to use. It's wonderful, but it's not free. And you have to pay that annual fee to keep it going. Or you can go with the free and very stable version of software called Contact Form 7. Not quite as easy to use. The documentation's robust, but a little odd, but there's no annual fees. So chat with your designer, chat with your developer, and find that balance that's a good fit for you. Did I cover everything on that one? I
I
did.
think we definitely covered a lot.
Okay,
I'm super glad that we got through all that content we wanted to get through. We come up with the content guessing what you guys are going to ask us. So we always want you to ask questions. That's why we leave time at the end for Q&A. If you would like to, I believe Yenting, they can come off mute, right? If you'd like to come off of mute and ask a question, we are here.
Yeah, if you do want to come off mute, just raise your hand and I'll give you the opportunity to speak. So while you guys are coming up with some questions, there were a couple of questions that came through registration that we can start out with.
Sounds good.
I'm going to start with the first one, which I think you guys covered, but I wanted to see if you can expand on. The question was, what plugins are worth the money? So I know you talked about the Gravity forms. Are there other ones that you've come across that you would recommend?
I always like to tell all owners, executive directors, decision makers, you get what you pay for. It's always great to start with free, just understand what you're getting. I normally, when we're going to do a contact form, I'll use Jetpack or Contact Form 7 just to start. There was a client that Ben's taking care of that needed something more convoluted and complicated for their contact forms. They're using Gravity Form 7, but we only, Gravity Forms, we only moved them to that when it became that point. So as with everything in IT, it depends. It's our motto. Depends. But yeah, definitely. Ben, what have you run across in the wilderness of plugins?
Yeah, there's a bunch, but there's one nonprofit that we work with here in Charlotte that they're using a paid plugin. Boy, it's really good quality, and it's called MemberPress. It wasn't cheap, but I think it was actually underpriced for the functionality that you were able to get. It allowed you to keep track of the members that participate within your organization, meeting invites. It had add-ons, paid add-ons in some cases, registration functionality. People could sign up for that particular event. It had built-in calendar event functionality. You could renew the member, what's the word? I can't think of the word. So folks would renew each year in their member status. You could pay in advance, and you could send, there was a mailer notification system that was built into it. It was a really great tool to keep track of your group or your groups. I think it's called MemberPress. Maybe you just do a Google for it. Maybe Google for MemberPress. I think it's all one word. MemberPress, WordPress, and you can check that one out. Again, I don't get any kickbacks from that. We just host a bunch of sites that use it, and the nonprofit that we were working with recently has been using it with great results. There's another one, Events Calendar, which I did mention about that recent update. There's a paid version of Events Calendar as well. When used properly, the most recent current version, it's very powerful. It's a great way to put the calendar of events that you have for your nonprofit on, I'm not sure which page you would do, maybe /calendar, /events, upcoming, however you want to build it out. And you can publish the calendar events. In the past, what we did was we had it synced up with the G Suite calendar within the organization. So whenever someone in the org published something on the G Suite calendar, it showed up on the website calendar just like that. Very cool. And the reason that both of these come to mind at the same time, because this nonprofit uses them both, the events calendar integrates nicely with MemberPress. So you can have that scheduling blend of functionality together. Complexity and cost, you probably will want to hire a contractor to help you out with some of that integration synchronization work. No big deal. You can go on upwork.com. You could reach out to Ross or I, and we can send you some referrals. It's not something that we do, but we can help you find somebody to get that done.
And it's a great.
So those are two plugins that pop up for me, Ross.
Yeah, it's a great plugin for next week, right? Because we're going to talk a little more about content and themes.
That's right.
Which you can also get free themes and pay for themes. I've used Divi. There's a lot of different ones, and I bought a lifetime license just because I was in the business. But yeah, you get what you pay for. There are more features, and there's better support, better code updates, better quality that you get with that. But yeah, those are definitely some great ones to go with.
Yeah, the other way to think about it too is you could get the freebie and then you can pay your developer $80 an hour for 10 hours, or you could pay $200 for the commercial version and get great functionality right out of the box. So keep that in mind.
Good, I like that one.
Mhm.
Yenting, were there other questions in registration? Okay.
Yes, the other question was, why does the site get spam comments?
Ooh, spam comments.
Oh, I love this
I
one.
love that one.
So much
because
fun.
it's so
Oh,
easy to stop that. So many years ago, spam comments were such a problem. It's a setting. It really is just a setting just to turn that off. And then Ben was talking about when you hit the website and it asks you to wait for 5 seconds, or it asks you to pick on the bicycle or the fire truck. That's for the website. The same thing can happen with form submissions. We're talking about contact form 7, adding that CAPTCHA to it, or that simple math, like what's 5 plus 7. That these are all just settings that need to be switched on. So if you're getting spam comments, let your developer or web host know, and if you don't have one, just let either of us know. We'll spend the 5 minutes to help you with that. But yeah, definite problem with WordPress websites that are stood up without that setting turned on.
right. To add on to the end of it, and we don't need to go into how to do it, but mention it with your developer. There are tools out there that can suppress it and bring it almost to 0. Mhm.
And the question is, why do they do that? It's to bring traffic to websites that are out there for nefarious reasons. So they're spamming your comments to get traffic to their websites, or to get links to their websites that Google will pick up. So there's a reason why they're doing it, but it's for nefarious reasons.
We had a customer many years ago that was getting spammed. Really, it's an attack called a DDoS attack, and a DDoS attack is really, I'm going to do things to you so often that you can't do legitimate business with your preferred customers. I'm going to consume all of your resources, and so that attacker pretty much tried to submit so much forms that our database just kept getting bigger and bigger, driving up our costs and slowing down the website. So that DDoS attack is a disruption, and you'll read about them in the news. WordPress and Cloudflare and StackPath, there are tools to subvert that.
Awesome. All right, Yenting, I think we're about to put 5 minutes back in everybody's day.
Yeah, looks like it. Thank you, Ben, Ross, so much for this. We are excited for next week's too. Join us. It's going to be January 26th, 12 o'clock. We're going to be talking about WordPress marketing and design, so please join us for that. Please do expect an email from me on Monday with the recording link as well as a slide deck. And if you do have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to any one of us. And with that, thank you guys so much and have a great rest of the day. Bye.